Indian Constitution and its brief summary. So let's move on to our topic. So, what is a constitution? At first, the Constitution of India, which acts as the supreme law and acts as a framework for the other prevailing laws of the nation. So, what is a framework actually? It is nothing but the Constitution of India acts as a framework which guides other prevalent laws such as BNS now or BNSS or other prevalent transfer of property acts. It acts as a framework and guides the norms and the restriction for such laws. The Constitution of India establishes structure, procedure, power, and duties of the government and also mentions the fundamental rights, directive principles, duties of citizens. Basically, the Constitution of India embarks fundamental rights, which are guaranteed certain rights to the individuals, as well as their duties to run a perfect state, a sovereign state. It also lays down directive principles, which guides the government to establish a norm, establish a perfect state, which guides both the citizens and the government to the ultimate goal. The Constitution declares India as a sovereign, socialist, democratic, and republic with a parliamentary form of government. The Indian Constitution shows the federal as well as a unitary system. So basically, Indian Constitution is neither federal or a unitary form of government. We can either federal or a central government. It is a more of a union form of government, which is neither federal or central. It's a kind of a mixed government when comes to the federal system. The Constitution of India consists of one preamble, 25 parts containing 448 articles and 12 schedules, 2 appendices, and as well as 106 amendments have been happened till date. So it is a very large constitution to be precise, and moreover, it's the largest constitution ever adopted. It was adopted on the year 26. It was adopted on the 1949 on the date of 26 November, which we call as a Constitution Day, and came effective on 26 January 1950, which is obviously Republic Day. So this is basically a chart of the Indian Constitution. You can see on the screen. So we can see that it has a one preamble. Preamble is nothing but we call it as a preface of the Constitution, which embarks basic principles and ideas the Constitution has been enriched. And there are 25 parts, 440 articles, which contains fundamental rights, directive principles, and fundamental duties, 2 appendices, 12 schedules, and 106 amendments, as I said earlier. So coming back to the preamble, these are the part. Now in this part, I will just explain various elements of the Constitution. First, starting the preamble serves as an introductory statement, as I already mentioned, outline the philosophy and objectives of the Constitution which has been adopted. The preamble declares the Indian Constitution as power and sovereignty of India rests with the people. Actually, the preamble itself starts with we the people of India, which means the people have declared themselves with the power and sovereignty of India. So, preamble also addresses the fundamental values such as justice, social, economic, and political justice as well, liberty, equality, and fraternity. Preamble aims to define India as a sovereign, socialist, secular, democratic, and republic nation. It was not as like this from the beginning of the Constitution when it was adopted, but in the year 1976, the 42nd Constitutional Amendment Act was introduced by a former Prime Minister Indira Gandhi, which added socialist, secular, integrity in the preamble. The Supreme Court, in various judgments, ruled that the preamble is a part of the Constitution and cannot be used to override explicit provisions. The ultimate aim of preamble is to establish a welfare state, ensuring social, economic, and democracy in the nation. Even though the preamble cannot be enforced in a court of law, as I said earlier, it is just an introductory statement outlining the principles of the Constitution, but it serves as a guiding light for the interpreting the laws and policies of the government. So now, moving on to the next part. In this part, I think the screen is visible to you. These are the 25 parts which has been enriched in the Indian Constitution. In this parts, I have highlighted the most important one for you to understand, which are here. The part 1 consists of union and state territories. Part 2 on citizenship. Part 3 on fundamental rights. Part 4 of directive principle of state policies. Part 4A is the fundamental duties. Part 11, relationship between union government and the state governments. Part 13, trade, commerce and intercourse within the territory of India. Part 18, which is the emergency provisions. Part 20, it is the amendment of the Indian Constitution. Apart from this, there are various important parts as well. which maybe you were aware of, like part 18, sorry, part 8, the Union Territories, and part 17, the languages. So I think you'll understand in the way of this course of what are the parts are. So moving on to the next topic is articles of the Indian Constitution. So articles are nothing but it is subcategory in different parts in the Constitution that contains detailed information on the subject or the title which the article represents. So Indian Constitution was originally framed on 395 articles, which has now expanded through various amendments and additions to 448 articles, organized in 25 parts, 12 schedules, and several appendices. Article 1 to 4 defines India's name, its territory, and provide for admission, establishment, and reorganization of states. Article 5 to 11 set out the provisions for citizenship at the commencement of the Constitution and empower Parliament to regulate citizenship. Article 12 to 35 guarantee fundamental rights such as equality before law, freedom of speech, the protection of life, which are enforceable by courts, which is a basic principle of the constitutions. Fundamental rights are nothing but the basic rights which have been guaranteed by the constitution itself, which cannot be amended at any go, but we can be sub judice, but cannot be amended at the whole stage, and it protects basic rights which cannot be affected by the acts of the government or acts of any other persons as well. The fundamental rights acts as safeguard against arbitrary state actions and ensure that individual liberty is maintained. Article 36 to 51 lays down directive principles of state policy, guiding the state in establishing social and economic justice, working towards a welfare state. Article 51A, introduced in Part 4A, lists the fundamental duties of citizens. Originally 10 duties, later extended to 11, emphasizing the responsibilities of citizens. Article 52 to 51 outline the structure, power, and functions of the union government, detailing the roles of the president, prime minister, and council of ministers. Whereas Article 79 to 85 explain the composition and functioning of parliament, which comprises the Lok Sabha and Rajya Sabha, and outlines the legislative process. Article 124 to 147 establish the Supreme Court as the apex judicial authority, setting forth its power to interpret and safeguard the Constitution. Article 152 to 237 provide the framework for state government, defining the roles of governors, chief ministers, and the state legislatures. Article 214 to 237 ensure the establishment of jurisdiction of High Court and subordinate courts, creating an uniform judicial structure across the country. Article 243 to 243O establishes Panchayat of rural local self-governance, ensuring democratic participation in grassroots levels. Whereas Article 245 to 263 defines the relationship between the union and the states, declaring the divisions of legislative, and administrative power. So moving to the next important provision is amendment of Indian Constitution. Article 368 of Indian Constitution actually governs the amendment process. So an amendment is nothing but the process by which it changes the nation's supreme legal document to reflecting evolving social and political issues, political needs. It basically is a change of the constitution itself. Provisions of the constitution. Amendments can be initiated by introducing a bill in either house of parliament, where it must be passed by a special majority of a total membership and by at least 2/3 of the members present and voting. Actually, for amendments affecting the federal structure of certain fundamental provisions, ratification by at least half of the state legislatures is also required. While the parliament enjoys a wide-ranging power to amend the Constitution of India, the Supreme Court has upheld that such powers cannot alter its basic structure, ensuring that the core principles of democracy, secularism, and the rule of law remain intact. It was adopted, actually, Supreme Court laid down this basic principle structure in the judgment, as most of you may be aware, in the Kesavananda Bharati v. State of Kerala case. So, moving on to the important amendments of Indian Constitution. The first Constitution Amendment, which was happened in the year 1951, introduced limitations on freedom of speech and expression and safeguard against reform laws by ensuring that such laws also they might infringe upon some rights were upheld to support social and economic reforms. Actually, another trivia on the first Constitution Amendment is the first Constitution Amendment happened because of two important judgments, which was actually based in Tamil Nadu, in the state of Madras back in the year. The two judgments were Ramesh Tapar was the state of Madras, and the state of Madras was Srimati Champakam Durarajan, which we may be well aware. One Ramesh Topar case actually dealt with the freedom of speech, and second one was Champakam Durarajan case, was a very famous case which constitutionalized the reservations and some important provisions in the constitution as well to support reservations based on caste categories. So next, the Fourth Amendment Act of 1955 strengthened land reforms policies by protecting laws relating agrarian reforms and property distribution from being struck down by courts, thus supporting socio-economic justice. 1 minute. So, 24th Amendment Act of 1971 is another important amendment. Power to amend affirm the Parliament's power to amend Constitution and clarify that 11 fundamental rights could be modified to constitutional amendment, establishing the supremacy of our parliamentary sovereignty over constitutional interpretations. And then the most important amendment of Constitution is 42nd Amendment Act, which happened in the year 1976, which is also known as a mini constitution itself. It introduced sweeping changes by adding the word socialist secular to the preamble, enshrining fundamental duties and curtailing judicial review powers, thereby altering the basic structure of the Constitution. Meanwhile, the 44th Amendment Act reversed many controversial provisions of the 42nd Amendment by restoring fundamental rights, reducing executive power during emergencies, and reaffirming the judiciary's authority to review laws. Basically, this 42nd and 44th Amendment Acts was moreover also known as Twin Amendment Acts. 42nd Amendment Act was more powerful, that it granted more power to the Union government. But 44th Constitutional Amendment moreover doesn't remodify that amendments, but it provided many checks and balances to the amendment of 42nd. 44th Amendment Act provided many checks and balances to the 42nd Amendment Act, which was quite criticized arbitrary. So moving on to the next amendment, which is the 52nd Amendment Act, introduced the anti-defection law to curb political defections by legislatures, thereby promoting greater stability and integrity in the legislative process. This is another important amendment which introduced the anti-defections laws, which is most prominent, one of the most prominent election laws. It lays down that a member of a legislative member cannot, without consulting its own party, his or her own party, cannot betray the trust and move another party arbitrarily without informing his or her mother party, which ultimately lay down greater stability and integrity in the legislative process. Next amendment will be the 61st Amendment Act of 1988, lower the voting age from 21 to 28, expanding the electorate and reinforcing the democratic principle of universal adult suffrage. In 1992, the 73rd Amendment Act happened, which ultimately established the Panchayati Raj system, which helped to decentralize power by creating a 3-tier system of local self-governments in rural areas, thereby empowering local communities. Then, 74th Amendment Act of 1992 mandated the creation and strengthening of urban local bodies, decentralizing urban governments, and ensuring better local administration in cities and towns. 86th Constitutional Amendment Act of 2002, which introduced Article 21A in the Indian Constitution, eventually made free and compulsory education for children as a fundamental right, emphasizing the critical role of education in individual empowerment and national development. Then comes the 101st Constitutional Amendment, which most of you may be well aware, which introduced a goods and service tax and unified nation's indirect tax structure, streamline tax administration, and create a single common market across India. Obviously known as GST tax, which was introduced in the year 2006 through 101st Constitutional Amendment Act. And another most important act recently is 299, which happened in the year 2019, which was a 103rd Amendment Act, which introduced 33% reservation for women in the local body elections to promote gender equality. So the next topic will be schedules of Indian Constitution. The schedules of the Indian Constitution annexes the detail and categorize the administrative legal provisions essential for its implementation. Originally, the Constitution had 8 schedules, but over time, this has expanded to 12, covering matters such as the allocation of seats in Parliament, the division of subjects between Union and the state, and the administration of tribal areas and local governments. These schedules serve as a practical tool to organize and clarify complex details that support the broader constitutional framework, and they can be amended to reflect changing administrative needs while remaining an integral part of the constitution. Some important schedules are as follows. The first schedule, which is the most important one, most primary one, lists the states and union territories along with their territorial boundaries, forming the basis of nation's administrative divisions. While as the fourth schedule details the allocation of seats in Rajya Sabha among states and union territories, ensuring the proportional representation in the upper house of the parliament. Fifth schedule provides for administration and control of scheduled areas, and well as the scheduled tribes offering special protection and development measures for these regions. The sixth schedule of Indian Constitution contains special provisions for the governance of tribal areas in the northeastern states, granting these regions a degree of autonomy to preserve their unique cultural and administrative practices. The seventh schedule, which is the most controversial one, obviously it is divides subjects into the union, state, and concurrent lists, thereby delineating the legislative powers between the central and state governments within the federal framework. Eighth schedule enumerates the official languages of India, reflecting the country's rich linguistic diversity and promoting the development of regional languages. Whereas the ninth schedule introduced certain laws to social justice and economic reforms from judicial review. Although such protections are not subject to scrutiny, these laws violate the basic structure of the constitution as well. So basically, the ninth schedule is nothing but an escaping part of constitution. So if a law has been if a local law which has been enabled, cannot be questioned in the eyes of the eyes of the judiciary if it has been added in the ninth schedule of the Indian Constitution. For example, take the Tamil Nadu Reservation Act, which provides almost 69% reservation, and it's also delineated the 50% cap, which was a 50% cap for the reservations in the education institution, which was introduced by the various judgments to the Supreme Court. Actually, it overacts the 50% cap Reservation Act of 69%. But it was added in the year 9th schedule, I think in the year 1994, which ultimately safeguard the rights of the people, and which has not been questioned till now by any court of law, any judicial proceedings. But in the year 2000, in the judgment known as I.R. Kohilo versus State of Tamil Nadu, it was observed by the Honorable Supreme Court of India that even if the provisions of the 9th schedule, which are found to violate the basic structure of the Indian Constitution, can be questioned at some situation in case-to-case basis. That's another trivia of 9th schedule. So moving on to the 10th schedule of the Indian Constitution, as we already spoke, we established anti-defection rules aimed at curbing political defection by legislatures, thereby enhancing stability and accountability in legislative process. So now we are going back to salient features of Indian Constitution as embarked with a distinct and unique features as compared to the other constitutions, keeping in view the peculiar problems and needs of the country. The most important salient features of the Indian Constitution are it's the longest written constitution in the world. The amendment procedure of the Constitution is partly rigid and partly flexible. The Constitution of India established India as a democratic republic country with parliamentary system of government. India is basically a federation, but a different type of federation, not like a federation of compared to United States of America or Canada. But in India, the union government was granted more power. But even though India is considered as a federal nation, a partly federal nation, fundamental rights has been embarked in the Constitution as well. Directive principle of state policies, fundamental duties, and ultimately the Constitution wants to establish India as a secular state. The Constitution promotes an independent judiciary and grants a single citizenship to the subjects of the state. The framing of the Indian Constitution. The Constitution Assembly of India was elected to write the Constitution of India. Following the nation's independence, its members served in the nation's first parliament. This body was formed in the year 1946 for the sole purpose of making the nation's constitution. The objectives of Indian Constitution, which are as follows: to set up as Union of India comprising British India and the Princely States, to set up a federal form of government with separate state and central government, to set up a democracy in which all powers is derived from the people, where all people are guaranteed justice, equality, and freedom, where minorities, depressed classes, and the tribal rights are protected. To protect the integrity of India and her sovereign rights over land, sea, and air. Dr. Sachidananda Sinha was the first president, was temporary of the Constitutional Assembly when it met on December 9th, 1946. Later, Dr. Rajendra Prasad became the president of the Constitutional Assembly, and Dr. Bhimarao Ambedkar became the chairman of the drafting committee on December 1946. The Constitutional Assembly ultimately had 385 members, of which 292 were elected by the elected members of the provincial legislative assemblies, while 93 members were nominated by the princely states. To these were to be added a representative each form of four chief commissioners provinces of Delhi, Ajmer, Marwar, Coorg, and British Balochistan. From time being till the constitution was made, India was governed by the Government of India Act 1935. Another trivia is the Government of India Act 1935 is also called as a mother document of Indian Constitution. Most of the provisions of Indian Constitution were inspired from the Government of India Act 1935 as well. The Assembly met in sessions open to the public for 106 days, spread over a period of 2 years, 11 months, and 18 days before adopting the Constitution of India. It was finally passed and accepted on November 26, 1949, which is the Constitution Day of India. In all, the 284 members of the Assembly signed the original copies of the Indian Constitution. After many deliberations and some modifications over 111 plenary sessions in 4 days, the 308 members of the Assembly signed 2 copies final of the document, one each in Hindi and English, on January 1950. Same day, the Assembly unanimously elected Dr. Rajendra Prasad as the President of India, which came into the effect on January 50. Known and celebrated. In this slide, you will see the borrowed features of India. So, Indian Constitution absorbed those features from other nations' constitutions that well suited the Indian problems and aspirations. So now you will see the list of the Indian Constitution, provisions of Indian Constitution, which has been borrowed from other constitutions as well. So from British, we actually borrowed a parliamentary form of government, rule of law and lawmaking procedure, single citizenship, institution of speaker, and doctrine of pleasure tenure of civil servants. From American Constitution, it is a judicial system and the fundamental rights. From the Canadian Constitution, we adopted the federal system with a strong central authority, residual powers, and central state relations. From the Irish Constitution, it is a directive principle of state policy and the election of President of India. From Australian Constitution, it is a concurrent list and the free of trade and service within the country. Freedom of trade and service within the country, and under Part 13, Article 301 of Indian Constitution. Weimar Constitution is nothing but a former German constitution from which we adopted the emergency provision. From the former Soviet Union Constitution, we adopted the 5-year plan and the fundamental duties. From the Government of India Act 1935, which was already mentioned, we adopted the office of the governor and the power of the federal jury. From the South African Constitution, we adopted the procedure of amendment of Indian Constitution. So moving on to the most important form of the Constitution, which is the fundamental rights, basically guarantees individual liberties and protects citizens from state's encroachment. Enriched in Articles 12 to 35, these rights ensure equality before law, freedom of speech and expression, protection of life and personal liberty, prohibition of exploitation, religious freedom, and cultural and educational rights. They are enforceable by the courts, which have interpreted and expanded their scope over time to balance individual rights with broader social interests. The salient features of fundamental rights are as follows. Equality before law. Article 14 ensures every individual of the state is treated equally under the law. Article 15 bans discrimination, this Article 23 and 24 outlaw human trafficking, forced labor, and child labor. Religious freedom, which was guaranteed under Article 25 to 28, ensure freedom to practice, manage, and propagate religion. Cultural and educational rights under Article 29 and 30, and judicial remedies under Article 32, which was guaranteed by Indian Constitution. Moving on to our next topic, which is the directive principle of state policy. The directive principles outlined in Article 36 to 251 are non-justiciable guidelines meant to steer the state in promoting social welfare economic justice, and fair distribution of resources. While they are not enforceable by any court, they influence legislative policy aimed to create conditions for a just society. Basically, the directive principles of state policy, which is also known as DPSP policies, which are not enforceable by any court of law, but it influences governments, the legislative governments, to form or reform a policy to meet with the ultimate goal and structure of the constitution. And the salient features are of the DPSP are to promote social and economic justice, to distribute a resource equitably among its citizens, to promote education and health within the citizens of the nation, and to promote local self-governance, protection of vulnerable groups such as the scheduled castes, scheduled tribes, and other backward classes, environmental conservations, international peace under Article 51 of Indian Constitution, and policy guidelines. So during this long run of Indian democratic structure, there has been various classes between fundamental rights and DPSPs. So in cases of conflict, the judiciary has generally held that fundamental rights are take precedence over DPSP, although both are seen as complementary parts of the constitutional scheme. The relevant case law and the points of procedures are in Kesavananda Bharati versus State of Kerala, which was the most important case in Indian judiciary as well, established that amendments cannot alter the basic structure of the constitution, protecting the fundamental rights even when implementing DPSP. In the Minerva Mills versus Union of India, it was reinforced the balance between the fundamental rights and DPSP, ruling that the imbalance violating the constitution basic structure is unacceptable. In IR Koilo versus State of Tamil Nadu, confirmed that laws, including the ninth schedule, as I told earlier, often linked to DPSP, are subjected to judicial review if they infringe on fundamental rights. Judicial review. Court ensured that while DPSP can guide policy, they cannot be used to justify law that abrogate fundamental rights or breach fundamental rights. So moving on to the next topic, which is the union government. Under Part 5 of Indian Constitution, which contains the articles 51, 151, that ultimately establishes the structure and functions of union government, including the executive and legislature. Its complexity arises from the detailed allocation of powers and responsibilities, ensuring a balance between centralized authority and democratic accountability. The features of this part are executive authority. Article 52 vests power in parliament, while Article 53 outlines the executive power of the union, which is exercised on the advice of Council of Ministers. It also lays down the role of Prime Minister in Article 74 and 75 on formation of Council of Ministers and the responsibilities of Prime Minister, emphasizing such a collective responsibility. It also establishes a bicameral legislature under Article 79 to 85, which establishes Parliament comprising Lok Sabha and Rajya Sabha and describe the legislative process between them. The Article 112 establishes a financial government based on the financial governance to provide for annual financial statement and budgeting process, ensuring fiscal accountability. And emergency provisions embarked in Article 352 to 360, they are not probably, as you understand, not in Part 5 of Indian Constitution, but in the functions of union government. So it can be considered as an interlinked part or a sub judice part of Part 5. Outline the mechanism, which outlines the mechanisms for declaring emergencies, balancing central authority with constitutional safeguards. The term constitutional safeguards has been established through various judicial interpretations, not by the constitution itself. Next, moving on to the next topic, which is the union judiciary. Under Article 124 to 147, establishes the Supreme Court as the apex judicial authority responsible for interpreting the Constitution and ensuring that laws and government actions comply with constitutional mandates. The features of it are Article 124 establishes the Supreme Court. Constitutional interpretations are made by the Supreme Court, deriving its power from Article 124 and its subsequent judgments. Judicial review. The court holds the authority to review laws and executive actions, ensuring they do not violate constitutional provisions as seen through such as case of the dispute solution. It's reinforcing federal principles. Doctrine. Through decision relating to Article 368 and others, the court has cemented that the Constitution's basic structure remains inviolate. Article 32, though part of fundamental rights, empowers the court to enforce these rights and provide remedies. So moving on to state judiciary. which was interlinked to judiciary, union judiciary as well. Part 6 addresses the organization and functioning of the state judiciary, including high courts and subordinate courts, ensuring the administrative of justice at the state level while remaining integrated with the nation's national judicial framework. So the features of it are Article 214 ultimately establishes the High Court in every state to exercise jurisdiction over state matters, while Article 214 to 215 defines powers and responsibilities of high courts in reviewing state laws and actions. The writ jurisdictions of the High Court, which has been enabled through Article 226 of the Indian Constitution, gave power to High Courts to issue writs to enforce fundamental rights for any other purposes. Subordinate courts, which was enabled through Article 233 to 237, provide the framework for the organization and the supervision of subordinate courts in the states. Integration with the national system. These articles maintain the state judicial decision should align with the national legal standards and the constitutional mandates. Next, moving on to the next topic, which is the Panchayat Raj, which was enabled through Part 9 of Indian Constitution, establishes Panchayat Raj system for local self-governments in rural areas, empowering citizens to participate directly in the administration and development of their communities. It is basically considered as a division of power to the local bodies and enable to act the local bodies autonomous. So direct democracy. Article 243 mandates the establishment of Gram Sabhas, village assemblies, to ensure direct citizen participation in local governance. Three-tier structure. The Constitution provides for panchayats at the village, intermediate, block, and district levels as detailed in the articles 243A and 243B. As I said earlier, this part of the Constitution empower local bodies to manage community resources and address local issues autonomously. The Panchayat Raj system is designed to work in tandem with state-level development and programs, empowering of the local development. So moving on to the ultimate topic, which is the relationship between union and states. Part 11 of the Indian Constitution, covered under Article 245 to 263, governs the distribution of legislative powers and financial relations between the union and the states, forming the backbone of Indian federal structure. The features of this part is division of subjects. Article 246 and 248 articulate union, state, and concurrent lists, clearly delineating the areas of exclusive and shared legislative jurisdiction. Whereas Article 268 and 280, which guides the financial transfer by allocating the funds, grants, and financial assistance from the union to the state government. Resourcial resolution and jurisdictional disputes. The Constitution of India provides mechanism to resolve conflicts over legislative and administrative responsibilities between two levels of government. Foundation of federal structure. These articles collectively form the backbone of federal system, balancing the central authority with state autonomy. So moving on to the conclusion, obviously the last part of this presentation. In conclusion, the Constitution of India is a giant and living document that secures individual freedom through detailed provisions of fundamental rights, but also guides the state in realizing the social justice and economic equity through directive principles while instilling a sense of duty among its citizens through fundamental duties. It covers the structure and powers of the union and state governments more effectively to balance and centralize authority and regional autonomy while establishing a very strong judiciary serving as a guardian of constitutional principles. It also includes a concurrent and with local self-government and cooperative federal guarantees, thereby implying a strong and preference and for democratic decentralization, which makes it capable of standing up to all sorts of changes made by society. Overall, it serves the aspirations of a country like India in the myriad diversity and at the same time, it ever-enduring backbone of democracy, which constantly triggers forward-looking governance and inclusive development. So that's all for today. We'll meet for the next class. Thank you.